Hi guys, it's Sierra. Shockingly, I am not there tonight, so I apologize. It's part per usual is going to be videoed by me. As much as I truly love these videos and enjoy doing them, I do really wish I was there to do this in person instead, so I apologize. I'm currently in Austin with our men's team. So, that being said, obviously, my group mates have started, and we're talking about fantasy sports. So, I'm going to just jump in and talk about a few more sport participation within fantasy sports. Now, obviously, your basketball, football, and baseball are, I guess we could call them high rollers within fantasy sports, and they've kind of kept a consistent status throughout the fantasy sports life of being, the most common. So the three sports that I'm going to talk about are actually a little more rare, and I actually didn't know that they were all fantasy sports. So to start, I'm going to start with NASCAR, which surprisingly has a 33% increase in the past 3 years of becoming a bigger and just growing more as a fantasy sport. Everything that I've seen about NASCAR, fantasy NASCAR, and everything that I've read has talked about, although it is a big growth within the last few years, it's also a struggle for NASCAR to kind of adapt to this new generation of sport, they call it. And I think that fantasy probably has a part in doing that. That's probably why they've tried to adapt to it, is because every other sport has fantasy, so why not NASCAR too? I truly believe that if it were to become a bigger thing or maybe a more renowned thing, then people would jump in on it. Everybody loves fantasy sports, and it's not just fantasy football that people love. I mean, you can love any of it, right? People who love betting love betting. That's just how it works. So I think that if it was more of a thrown out there factor, or people were more aware that it was actually a fantasy sport that I was unaware of, that people would jump on board with it, and maybe it wouldn't be so hard to adapt to. The second sport I'm going to talk about is Major League Soccer. Within Major League Soccer, I was never able to actually find a concrete number or data of exactly how many people participate within the fantasy sport of soccer, but everything I've read is how common soccer is. Obviously, it's one of the most renowned sports in the world. It's everywhere. It's literally a global phenomenon. So they talked a lot about how soccer isn't here right now as one of the highest fantasy leagues, but it should be. Think about it, if soccer is such an important sport to so many people around the globe, and it's so common and it's so loved, and it's also one of the very few sports that's year-round, and it can be bet on year-round. And whether it's whichever league it may be, or professional or MLS or whatever it may be, there's constantly soccer going on throughout the year, throughout the world. So these people that I was reading over talked a lot about how with that much data or with that much love of a sport, that one day they hope that MLS soccer or that fantasy soccer can take over fantasy football or fantasy basketball or fantasy baseball, whatever it may be. So, like I said, there was no concrete data on how many people participate in it, but it talked a lot about how they have high hopes of how it can just consistently grow throughout the next few years. So the last sport I'm going to talk about, coincidentally enough, is golf, which honestly I was unaware that that was a fantasy sport, and obviously I know quite a bit about golf. It's kind of my life, so I was shocked to see that. Most of the betting or gambling I've seen done within the sport of golf is majorly probably illegal. So to see that there's actually a fantasy golf and a way to do it legally is comforting to me, for sure. So everything I've read about golf is that besides your obvious three, your fantasy football, fantasy baseball, fantasy basketball, golf is actually the #1 growing sport right now within DraftKings and many other fantasy sites. So golf is targeted so well and works so well with things like DraftKings because it's set around their 4 majors in golf, which are the US Open, the Open Championship, the PGA Championship, and the obvious, the Masters, which is coming up, which makes golf really big right now within fantasy leagues. So by them making golf kind of centered around these 4 events rather than every week, which you could do, it increases their, fantasies leagues money, because golf is so big to gamble on, and people love gambling on these events and these tournaments every year. Now, golf is consistently growing. Now, like I said, majority of betting on golf is probably illegal, just on the side, just, outside of Vegas, stuff like that. But if golf continues to grow at the rate that it is right now with like DraftKings, like I said, then I believe that they will consistently become one of the highest rollers also. Golf is no different in fantasy world than football or anything. You pick your team. So you get to just pick your favorite golfers, basically. And they're not on a team, so I guess maybe it's a little harder to determine, wins and losses and stuff. They're just individuals, which is why golf can be very different from a few. But in the fantasy world, I believe it's pretty close to the same. I mean, you're still picking your favorite guys, those guys you think that could win that week. So, like I said, I was shocked that there was fantasy golf, which makes me probably a bad coach, but whatever. So those are the 3 sports that I'm talking about, just participation within the fantasy sports. And my team is going to take it a little further. So have a good night, guys. Bye.